Thank you. I hope that everybody can hear me well. Hi everyone, I'm George Samagovidis. I'm an associate professor in computing and mathematical sciences at the University of Greenwich. My specialization is on AI, machine learning and blockchain for AML, anti-money laundering and financial crime. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have a panel of distinguished guests. So next to me is Roshan Aradki from NatWest, and I will let people introduce themselves later on, say a few words. That's Nitin Solomon from Nomura, and finally Stacey English from Theta Lake. The topic for today, I have to read it. New technologies, AI, ML, blockchain to solve regulatory problems. It's quite a broad one, of course. And of course, we know we're standing between you and your coffee break. So we will try to make the best use of the time. We are going to address this through some sort of thematic, through a thematic approach. So the first thing I want to open with, and before I give the floor to my panelists, is to start from an observation. Actually, two observations. The one about Regtech, and we are hearing a lot more about tech than reg. And the word Regtech seems to me that it's kind of an oxymoron in the sense that you have the two bits, the regulation on the one hand, which is by nature reactive as law, and you have tech, which is by nature proactive as innovation. And it seems also that the landscape in Regtech is changing, and the new affordances of technologies are giving new grounds, and that's what makes it a very interesting conversation. The next one is that when we talk about Regtech, I think we need to make a couple of distinctions. That we have a dichotomy. We have Regtech from the industry point of view, so what applications are available and what's happening in technology, and on the other hand, you have regulators and how they make use of technology. So you have an industry space and you have the regulator space. Without further ado, I think I'll just start from our first theme, which has to do with the state of play. I'd like to start with from Stacey. I mean, the thing is that we've gone a long way since level 39 and the regulatory sandbox. We've had the pandemic in between, and things have changed. So, the real question is, what is the state of play now? Where are we standing now?
Well, firstly, hi everyone, it's so fabulous to be here. I'm Stacey English from Theta Lake, and we provide compliance and security for the modern collaboration platforms that you're using, like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and all those things that we're absolutely dependent on. But I've been in financial services regulation for 25 years, so a lot of my thoughts are actually rooted in being a former regulator and a practitioner in banks and insurers. So in terms of state of play, I know we were talking about really what are the regulatory challenges that are driving all the opportunities for Regtech, and certainly the overriding thing that we're seeing is this move pretty much overnight to new ways of working. So we've all had to adopt a new model to let employees work from home. And I know it's something that's come up all day. Every panel I've sat in, it's come up because it's so topical and it's so important. And that really has, is this microphone all right? Kind of a bit echoey.
It's fine.
It's all right. That really has created all sorts of regulatory challenges that we hadn't anticipated. So we already had all sorts of record-keeping obligations, supervisory obligations, needing to protect data. And suddenly we've all implemented new systems to communicate. So the way we're sharing information is very, very different. We're communicating through video and chat and all different ways that we're finding is creating those challenges to actually how do you retain all this information, how do you supervise it. And I know it was mentioned earlier again, the guidance from the FCA just this week to say that's fine, you can work from home, you can have remote workers, but don't forget actually all of your regulatory obligations and standards that you have to meet still stand. And that's the challenge that firms really face, because when you've got a very different type of communication, and you're all sending things like GIFs and emojis and reactions, and it changes the meaning. We've all done a screen share where we shared the wrong screen, and if it's got sensitive data or something on it, it's a real problem. So that is really what's driving the challenges, is those record keeping and supervisory and security challenges. And the only option firms have really is to turn these things off. So they spend all this money on these fabulous systems that are keeping everyone productive and connected, and then you have to turn off your video or your chat. So that's where we're seeing the demand to say, well, look, we've spent all this money on these really good systems, they're working really well for us, but we're actually so worried about the compliance and security obligations, we can't really use them properly. So that's where we're helping.
Thank you, Stacey. Peter, what do you think?
Sure, so I'll also start with just saying hi and thank you for having me here. So my name is Nitan and I'm the head of surveillance and financial crime technology at Namira. So talking about the challenges and opportunities, I think one challenge that may have been kind of amplified with the sort of digital transformation that we have undergone is the rise in volumes. So rise in trade volumes, client data, etc. We all know that a lot of the solutions, the more traditional, old generation solutions, have not been the most efficient. But the more data you bring in, it really gets to an unsustainable state. So that has been one challenge, and Regtech, of course, gives Regtech and more advanced technology an opportunity. Another challenge that is not specific to compliance, but the pandemic has brought some financial difficulties to a lot of organizations, and a lot of departments, including compliance, have had some serious cost reduction targets. And it's actually quite interesting because before the pandemic, if you sometimes were to pitch, a certain Regtech solution, people would be quite, hesitant and may not want to change their strategy. But with these new, very aggressive targets, there aren't that many ways to bring down the cost so significantly as some organizations have had to. And actually, Regtech now becomes a tool for cost reduction. So it's really, you go and you pitch and you say, well, the only way that I can see to bring down our cost by 20, 30% is by doing this, introducing this change. And so really just a drive for cost reduction, and the pandemic has definitely contributed to this fact.
Thank you very much. How about you?
Hi there, everyone. So it's nice to be here as well. So I'm Roshan. I work in the Central Innovation Team over at NatWest. I think I'll probably just echo everything what people have been saying here. I mean, I think that the way I look at it is like, if you look at all the kind of the key thematic areas, under Regtech, you look at risk and conduct, you look at compliance, you look at kind of, risk analytics, ID&V, genuine presence assurance, all of these different kind of thematic areas. We know that there's lots of use cases underneath all of that. I think that what I've seen as a kind of a practitioner within the bank is the fact that we are all sort of working from home, given the pandemic, and there is that kind of federated model right now of all of us being at home, all of our customers being at home. There's just a vast amount of communication that's going on here, and I think that we've now got to, I don't want to say it's a tipping point, but we've now got to a point in time whereby adoption of, I suppose, more mechanical or mechanized or automated approaches is almost a necessity, because it's just the way the world has gone now. So we're not all sitting in an office, we're not all together, we're not all directly interfacing with customers. So if we think about it from the customer perspective, and us being customers ourselves and dealing with our employees, each other, we're kind of like, we are online, and we're kind of moving everything from analog to digital. And I think that the one thing that I have seen is there is an appetite and a need to adopt a lot of Regtech solutions and other solutions as well. I think that there's been a lot of conversation around kind of AI and machine learning. So without going into the AI and machine learning rabbit hole at this point in the conversation, which I'm sure we will, there's just been this huge, kind of volume increase. I think that Nitsan touched upon it in terms of data. There's a huge amount of unstructured data, huge amount of structured and semi-structured data that's now sort of flying around there, whether it's employee to employee or customer to employee through all these different, digital conversational channels, like, web, whether it's web chat, whether it's telephony or video. So I think, where am I going with this? I think that there's a real necessity to have the tools which can monitor, how data is basically created, how it's stored, how it's shared, how it's leveraged, how it's processed. I think there's a huge amount of kind of digital tooling that's going on in terms of, extraction of information from, for example, from digital contracts and digital interfaces. So I think that the direction of travel is a very fertile ground, but I think that, again, just in summation, is that from a cultural standpoint and necessity standpoint, I think the curve is kind of, it's increasing quite heavily.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. That's a bit better. So thank you very much, everyone. I guess these make very compelling and interesting points. I mean, if we move on to what I would call the latest trends in regulation and technology, and I will continue. I will insist separating the two rather than conflating the term Regtech. It's at the end of the day about how technology serves regulation. I'd like to talk a bit about the latest trends. So what's been happening in the last 12 months. So we have a wide variety of occurrences. We have a lot of talk about explainable AI, for instance. We have a lot of talk about smart contracts, blockchain, and arguably the most important use cases come from what goes under the term of the permissioned blockchain, so private blockchains and all that. But there's also been trends in the industry for not only for how the regulators use technology and how they embrace technology, but also how new players in this FinTech, Regtech ecosystem, whatever we want to call it, are growing and are appearing. So I'd like to invite Nitzan to start this one.
Sure. So I'll share my view around two processes of evolution as I see it. So the one is at the beginning, and that's before the past 12 months, but I think we used to see a small number of players providing a large number of solutions, right? So there used to be, these a small number of players in the compliance space, and you would get your financial crime for them in various different solutions. Then I think we've gone into this era where there were these small startup companies kind of growing and providing really excellent point solutions. So they would have a great solution for a specific problem, for a specific use case. But then as an organization, it was kind of difficult from like an ecosystem standpoint, because you can't pick the very best solution and it might just be these kind of smaller players, but you don't really want to end up having 20 different systems that don't really talk to each other. And I think what we've seen, and I don't know if necessarily the past 12 months, but I think that the recent trend has been recreating this ecosystem. And I don't mean by that it has to be a single organization, but I think Regtech players out there kind of understand and see it from the point of view of the organizations. And we're seeing partnerships, and we're seeing kind of integrations, or sort of a lot of solutions being integration ready. So, when they propose what they can do, it's already as part of this package and part of just giving consideration to how this could play alongside all of the other solutions. So I think this is a really interesting and great trend. And the other one, I think, is to do with the actual surveillance or monitoring. So, we all know in the past, most of what we had was kind of deterministic, event-based surveillance or monitoring, looking at that one trade, or and having these very simple rules running against it. I think again this is kind of like a three-step thing, whereby we started seeing more advanced technologies going into play. We started seeing no longer just deterministic solutions, but the focus was still relatively narrow. So you could you have better tools to indicate whether for example, the trade is suspicious or not, but you're still focusing on that particular trade. And I think, again, the past 12 months or so, I don't know, specifically, but I think there is this a bit more of a holistic view of an occurrence or something worth investigating. So whether in the financial crime space, for example, it's like a client-centric view, so you don't look at a specific trade by the client, you look at overall that client and their risk. Or if it's in the trade surveillance space, you have this sort of trader-based view. But again, you go beyond looking at very specific activities. And again, so I think this is also a very interesting and positive trend that we see today.
Right, thanks. Stacey, what would you like to top this up?
Absolutely. So in this new world of work that we're all trying to come to terms with and figure out, and I think today's a really good example. We've got hybrid and in-person. We're finding that organisations are going back to the environment, they're looking at their existing controls and actually thinking, well, this doesn't actually work for the way we operate now. And when you add to that the FCA and other regulators say, well, look, your controls have to be equally robust, whether you're in the office or at home. it becomes a challenge when you're communicating and sharing information in a very different way. So finding that some of the legacy approaches, the legacy technology just doesn't work for the way you're operating now is really driving that need for new technology. And that's where we're seeing AI and machine learning really coming into its own, because it can do things that word searches or lexicons or this much simpler technology can't do. And some of the things that panelists have chatted about today, in terms of, say, volume, there's no way, if you're all communicating on video and you might be 100 videos a day, that anybody could possibly watch them. It would be a complete waste of their time to do that. So, you need something that can actually review those, pinpoint risks, identify the issues in them and surface and highlight them to you. You need to be able to look at visual images. That's something that's not going to get picked up in a transcript. So if you're having a video call and then someone holds something confidential up, you're never going to pick that up if you don't have the sort of machine learning and natural language processing to actually identify that. Speed is really, really important in this scenario. So we've got such a risk of data leakage and sharing files and the wrong information, and potential for malware to get into your systems in this sort of heightened risk that we're working in. So you really need to act quickly to get any malware or any data leakage addressed out your system and dealt with. And then context, that's another one. You just cannot, with traditional approaches, understand the full context of a conversation. So whether that's around misconduct or collusion, you need to understand what emojis were added and what GIFs and what reactions. It's a completely different way to the way we would use email and print stuff out and sit around a phone in a meeting room with one of those spider phones. It's completely different. So that's what we're seeing drive it. That actually we need different tools, and with that regulatory push as well. That's what's driving the need for these new systems.
Yeah. How about you, Roshan? What do you think?
I suppose I'll just echo everything everyone's saying. I mean, okay, so we've talked about necessity, and I've talked about kind of like the thematic areas. You talk about ID and V, you talk about, again, risk and conduct, compliance, all these kinds of things. You talk about fin crime. I think for me, what I have noticed, so the seat that I sit in from an innovation standpoint, when I get questions from the business, I get questions from compliance teams, questions from the privacy team, from information security, all of these really important stakeholders that sit across the bank, that touch a lot of customers, touch a lot of data, and basically are there to make sure that we do everything in a very sort of safe and secure fashion. What I have noticed, and I'm sure probably everyone in the room has noticed, that over the last 6 years of me doing this role, a lot of the solutions that are out there are being started by people who have a lot of market practitioner experience. So you're looking at a lot of the top regtechs out there now, if you want to call it regtech. A lot of these technology solutions that target regulatory, rules and policies that we've got to adhere to. The teams behind them, I've noticed the teams behind them have come from either a regulatory background, they come from a market practitioner background, they've had years of experience working within banks, financial service firms, and all the rest, and they're teaming up with very good technology. So one thing I think is very impressive is that they understand the architectural kind of direction of travel for a lot of these big organizations. So as you kind of migrate to kind of a hybrid model, for example, private clouds, enterprise clouds, leveraging public clouds, and using SaaS platforms, I think the point I'm trying to make here is that the tools have got cleverer. I do agree with Nitin in terms of there are a lot of point solutions, and I think in organizations we're looking for fewer, bigger. We're looking for vendors that can do a lot more. We're looking for vendors that can be, I don't want to use the word transformative, but they can be pervasive, that you can use tools and you can apply them widely across an organization, because it helps in consistency and it also helps in terms of managing deployment. But what I would say again is that it is a competitive landscape out there, but that's great because we're seeing a lot of really, really smart, good tools. I think the challenge is about adoption. I think that there's a lot of really good tools built by a lot of really great people who really understand problems, who really understand opportunities, who really understand the message from the regulators. But I think that the onus is really, I hate to say this, I don't want to put anything on the back. I think the onus is on us, is on the big firms to adopt. It's on the big firms that we can easily test, we can understand the value, but we've got to adopt. And I think that with the culture these days really, really on side, everyone's really keen to do this. I think with support and push by the regulator, it's better, I think, is what I would say. Yeah. It's a positive environment.
All right. Thank you, Roshan. I guess, moving along the timeline, I'd like to move on to the question, where is Regtech or regulatory technology or technology for regulators is moving. And I was really looking forward to have Melvin here, but he couldn't make it from the Bank of England, because I would have loved to have his view on CBDCs, on digital assets, and where this is going. So, but I think there are people on the panel also have some regulatory background and can help. Now, the point here is that we've seen, and we're seeing, if you like, closer collaboration between regulators and industry. We're seeing regulatory requirements becoming international. It's almost, the business, the transaction business is by definition international. We see a lot of movement in areas such as regulatory arbitrage, for instance, and I recall, one of the speakers in a panel before mentioned that. So the question really for my panel is, where do we think, and that will lead then to the next question, the closing question, which has to do with innovation and the future of Regtech. Where do you think that Regtech is heading today? I don't know who wants to take this one first. Would you like to have a stab, or?
I think I was actually going to start with the next question, but I mean,
whichever.
I would probably
On the regulation point,
Sure.
As an ex-regulator, I'll have you try and stand in for Bank of England. So I think what's most notable here is that the regulator's moving to be a data-driven regulator, and they've been very clear about this. And I think they said there'll be as much as a data regulator as they will be a financial regulator. And I think that really puts firms on notice that they are going to need to be providing much more data to them in a format that they can use, because we know, the amount of data they're looking at in investigations has gone up 200%, and they're using it in supervision. Of course, they're trying to do remote supervision, so all those records need to go to them. So I think knowing that you've got to get that data to them in an accessible way, and you really must know what's in it, because the last thing you want to do is hand over a load of data that the regulator finds something in there that you don't know about. So that, I think, is a big change. And I also think the precise detail of the rules will never keep pace with the pace of technology change. So Devin was speaking earlier, and he had a great quote from ESMA, where it's that outcomes-based approach to regulation. You have to keep records, and you have to supervise them, and you have to make sure that conduct is appropriate in your business. And don't expect the rule to say, well, you need to capture this, this, and this type of emoji, and this type of message. And it's an outcomes-based. You have your records, supervise them properly, and I think that's can be quite a challenge for a lot of firms actually who can't get those records, who can't currently capture them all. And I think as we start to move back into whatever a normal environment is, and regulators start to ask us for those records, that's going to be an issue.
Thank you. Listen.
So I guess not on the regulatory front, but I think in general, talking about kind of like the future of Regtech, if you like. So one, perhaps too ambitious vision that I would have is that I think we could use the tools that are being deployed today for financial crime and compliance, and kind of turn compliance from a cost center to a profit center in some ways. Because a lot of these technologies, so the technologies we use to do client screening, essentially we are getting a huge amount of insights around what our clients are doing. How it differs to what other people with a similar profile are doing, other personas. So that's a huge amount of valuable information that can then be used, in marketing, user research, other area, and essentially drive some profit. And also when it comes to, for example, communication surveillance. So in firms where you are kind of monitoring your employees, you're going through the email, every phone call. There are some insights there that, again, you can use to your own benefit. And for example, things like, employee well-being. So there are ways in which the tools that are, have been developed for the sort of Regtech use case can be used kind of beyond that. And you can achieve more. And for us, always as practitioners, it's always about how do I justify the cost? How do I justify deploying this? And, this is, I think important and useful, but also a good, a way to get that buy-in, to get that sign-off, to try and make more out of these tools that are available today. And I think the other point around future of Regtech would be, I very much agree with what you said earlier. I think, when we talk about the future, I don't think at this stage it's about, getting more new edge technologies. I think, it's more about, getting the organizations through that journey. It's about us, understanding what to do with it, how to work with it. What is the operating model we should be having? What does it mean for our line one reviewer? So kind of trying to make sense out of all of this is probably where most focus should be. And I think, it's actually great that we see Regtech companies help us, organizations, through this journey. But I think that's where the focus will be in the coming, the next few years, us getting confidence. So we're going to see some success. We are seeing actually some success stories in the industry that are giving some confidence. So I think that it's not about, the new exciting technology that is, I think we are kind of there. It's more about how do we gain confidence and how do we implement.
All right. I mean, I think that kind of, it's a great segue to the last bit. Which has to do with, again, following up from what was said before, all very good points, is where innovation is heading in the Regtech space. I mean, there is a lot, and we were having this conversation we had lots of conversations just before the panel. So I feel like we've kind of exhausted all possible corners of it, but. There are things, developments like, smart contracts, NFTs, digital assets, and all that. It's not, of course, about the technology. It's about the technological affordances. And, of course, innovation is not about only technology. It's about the commercialization of technology, and therefore, it's about the product. So, and I would like to, invite your view, Roshan.
No, thanks for that, Georgios. I mean, I'll take a step back. I completely agree with what you guys are saying, the panel are saying in terms of, I think that Regtech also serves a purpose in terms of engendering sort of best practice. So Regtech comes in there to solve a certain or specific problem. But a lot of the Regtech solutions, for example, if you look at conversational intelligence, you're using conversational intelligence platforms to monitor communications to make sure employees are complying with policy and how they interact with customers. But it can also lead to kind of insights management, insights in terms of how to better interact with customers as well. So I do agree with you that as opposed to being looked upon as purely a cost and something that you have to do, it also can actually engender best practice, and it can be kind of very valuable for businesses to adopt. So I think that people have got to look at it from many different angles. And then moving into the innovation kind of topic, and I had a very structured answer for this. So I take kind of a step back and I look at, say, 2009. So look at the environmental factors which have been driving a lot of the change recently and kind of 10 years ago. In 2009, you had the market collapse. You had all these kind of regulations that came in from MiFID and all the rest. You have, moving forward, you've had Brexit, you've had the pandemic, and now you've got a really important move, and this is an extremely important move in terms of like, corporate kind of, I suppose, environmental, social, and corporate governance. You've had a very purpose-led kind of move by all the firms these days. We're all on the same planet. We're all in it together at the end of the day, and it's extremely important. So you have these environmental drivers, and the pandemic, as we have known, has kind of exacerbated the requirement for more mechanized, automated approaches to the way we work. We just have to do it. It's just the way the world that we live in. So you have that. Then you look at kind of like the business and customer success parts, which I kind of look at quite closely in terms of you have a very competitive landscape. I think we've touched upon, or somebody mentioned, there's the neobanks, there's the challengers, there's the fintechs and all the rest. There's lots of market disruption. You look at basically there's been a cultural shift, partly driven by necessity, but there's been a cultural willingness now to adopt. So you do have that kind of managerial and senior managerial buy-in to spending discretionary and non-discretionary budgets on a lot of these tools. So it's not just superficial or social. It's people. We do need to do this. You have this kind of growth in technology. We've talked about the quality of the solutions that are out there, the market practitioners behind all of this, the people who are building these tools, the technologists in combination with experienced people who've come from these backgrounds. Technology's also moved, as Gartner might say, technology's moved from being purely just a technology kind of owned domain to being kind of business technologists. You have people on the business front line now who can build technology. We all talk about microservices, and we all talk about basically kind of, I suppose, being self-sufficient and all the rest, and that's happening a lot more. But where am I really going with all of this? I mean, you have these environmental drivers, you have the business and customer success, you have the technical drivers, and you have the business need, like Nitzan's talked about in terms of like cost out and actually creating kind of revenue or profit centers. So there's many things that go into this, and I think that also with this kind of shift, as I said before, in terms of from an architectural standpoint, moving from these old clunky legacy systems and the adoption of cloud and hybrid type models, I think that you have this kind of like, from an innovation standpoint, you have this like perfect storm now. It's a very fertile ground. There's a lot of willingness, there's capital, there's desire, there's necessity, and it's all kind of, I suppose, everyone is driving one another. I think the role, but what I have to do though is, given the fact that there is lots of great solutions out there, given the fact that there's not 1,000 use cases, but there's hundreds of use cases under those thematic areas that we've talked about, ID&V, onboarding, KYC, risk and compliance, conduct, and all the rest. The point is that you've got to get the right stakeholders on the part. There's many people in organizations from information security, risk, policy, legal, that need to be part of the conversation when it comes to innovation. I mean, innovation in itself is great, but it also needs the support from key departments, key stakeholders within the firm. So you need to basically manage all the stakeholders. You need to really understand what it is that we're trying to actually achieve here. I think, Stacey had a great point in terms of outcomes-based solutioning, and that's absolutely, spot on. You really need to understand, like, what exactly are we trying to do? And like, what is the outcome or outcomes that we need? And is it a single solution? Is it a myriad of solutions? I mean, what are we actually trying to achieve, and what are we trying to achieve for the customer and for a safer bank and all the rest? And I think that the role that I have is basically make sure that we distill all that information, we understand it, bring the right people on the part, bring it together, join dots that we didn't know exist. And I think that what's great is that there are a lot of solutions out there that we can scout for. But the hard part might not be, and I hope not be too controversial, the hard part might not be the scouting, it's the distillation, it's getting to the right answer. I don't know if there is a right answer. There certainly is an answer, and there's lots of answers out there because there's lots of great stuff out there. But again, I would probably reiterate that with this growth in AI, with the growth in DLT, and digital assets and all the rest as well, we're not spoiled for choice.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Stacey, you want to
time, so just the last thing I'd say about the future of Regtech is integration is going to be one of the most important things. It's one of the things that came out of the FCA research and what was the barrier to adoption, and it's something that's really important to us at Data Lake. We are built with integrations in mind. We've got 40 plus frictionless integrations. We know we are part of a bigger system of tools. We know that firms have multiple tools to do their compliance, and we fit within that, and you have to kind of, the last thing a firm wants is something that's going to come in and disrupt their workforce or their customers. So, very much built around, well, if you'd like to archive with us, that's fine. If you have another archive vendor, that's fine. We can send data to them. If you want to export stuff out of the system, we can do that. You can pick and choose, and I think that is going to be so important. To your point, you can't have all these point solutions that just try and solve everything. You have to work with all sorts of partners to make sure you're bringing in making use of all of the tools that a firm uses.
Liz, any final points?
Yeah, just, again on that, kind of reiterating what's been said, but I think, one approach that has been taken, I think, across some organizations is kind of, let's keep everything as is and let's sprinkle some innovation on top. So let's keep our, transaction monitoring solution, and then let's look at maybe putting some layer on, and I think it might be right for now. That may be where we are in terms of the maturity, but I think, true innovation, and I am rehashing what's been said, but I do think that true innovation on the client side does mean that, and it can be over time, and it can be a process, but it does mean that you don't look at it as this sort of, small additional incremental bit that you're putting on top of everything else. That's also not going to be cost effective. It's really just thinking about I'm not specifically system-wise replacing, but really sort of changing a change of state of mind, change of your mindset to a one of proper innovation, and really kind of not just having this thing as a very, very thin layer on the top, but everything else stays the same is the only thing I'll add.
Right. Oh, excellent. I think we covered a lot. I mean, I know we only have 6 minutes, just as the clock is ticking. Just to mention before we have time to take a couple of questions. I mean, I think one of the from my point of view, one of the core observations, and we've been seeing that in the so-called FinTech revolution, that what you have here is a reintermediation of the total product and financial services supply chain, and you have what I call XaaS, X as a service, everything as a service banking as a service and KYC as a service and all that. And one of the questions is relevant here. And I think there is a significant role for the regulator there to not really follow the technology, but understand the technology. And because the regulator cannot afford not to. They have to stay abreast. This is happening, and all these small KYC providers and all this ID verification as a service is happening. At some point, it lands on their table, and the regulator has to say yay or nay to that. And therefore, there's that prerogative for the regulator to become more tech savvy. There are a couple of questions here that I'd like to share with you. So, what are your thoughts about putting KYC on a blockchain? So, if I want to rephrase that, I would say, are there any views about using blockchain for KYC? I'm not entirely sure what the question, or what is the essence of the question. If the question comes from in here, if somebody wants to clarify it, no, it's probably an online one. Let me take a stab at it then first. Let me start on that. Now, having a utility, if that's the meaning of the question, having a KYC utility on a public blockchain is a long way from conception to delivery. We've had discussions again, before this panel about how the basic plumbing and the infrastructure requires, a lot of re-engineering, and it's essentially an enterprise architecture's problem. But there are a lot of use cases for KYC using DLTs, distributed ledger technologies. But I think we are a long way for a number of technical and non-technical reasons from doing that. And I don't know what you guys think. Any thoughts?
I don't think I can do that question justice,
Yeah.
but in the time we have available. But I think anything with a good audit trail as a regulator is important to me. So if that helps, if it was something that helps organisations do things more efficiently, then that's great. If it's a good audit trail, then that's great too. But beyond that.
No, definitely see the merits of using blockchain for various different use cases. But I would probably approach KYC sort of like technically agnostically, if you like. I don't necessarily think it's a blockchain issue or it's a machine learning issue. I think it's just what is the best solution or approach to kind of solving various different parts of the kind of the value chain, if you like. So I would say there's no reason why you wouldn't use it, but you shouldn't. It should be meritocratic in terms of the decision-making process, in terms of what you do deploy.
Yeah, that kind of connects to the the usual saying that we're talking about blockchain, saying blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. In the sense that at some point it was everything over a blockchain is a solution, and I guess you put the you put it very correctly in saying that it's about the KYC problem, and if we don't need a blockchain can deliver a more democratized and more transparent process, but again that does not come without its caveats, right? Okay. Nitin, do you have anything to add on that? No? Okay, I'll let you off the hook on this one. There is another interesting one, which is, which of the current regulatory challenges will, in your opinion, be solved first? Who wants to take that?
Well, I'd like to say that we are solving the challenge of record keeping and supervision first, because obviously that is something that's happening now, and the technology is there to do it. So, but when you talk about regulatory challenges, there are so many, it's so broad. That I think there are a number of good solutions, not solving a number of things now.
I think the we here is something that's because I think there are good solutions out there today for many of the existing Regtech problems, but it's just again going back to that slightly generic but true to me point around the sort of implementation. It's about the way it's picking the right solution. So as an example, right? So data management is a huge problem, and a lot of the fines have been around the fact that you've not had proper data handling, data management. It's not that it's not doable. It's not that there are no solutions to do it. It's just the way that they are being implemented today. So I think again it comes back to who is solving what. I would hope that when it comes to data, largely as as financial institutions, we are making quite a good progress there. Record keeping maybe as well, but that's my view.
Really quickly, I think making huge strides in machine learning and sort of managing machine learning from an MLOps perspective in terms of explainability, ethics, bias, and all the rest. And I think a lot of stuff that I've been involved in our conversations have been around, handling data, storing data, leverage data, processing data, and all the rest. And I think that it's come a long way. So I would just echo what you guys said.
Okay. I think, as I said, we ran out of time, and I was thinking whether I'm going to be cheeky and eat out into your coffee break, but you'll know that I decided not to. That is everything. I'd like to thank my panelists. This was a very interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you had the opportunity we had the opportunity to cover enough of the background and what you wanted to get out of this panel. So thank you very much.